Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to try to unpack some fascinating research that suggests the more social an animal species is, the longer they might live.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We'll be looking at a paper by Roberto Salguero Gomez from the University of Oxford, published in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B.
Okay.
So have you ever, wondered if those super social meerkats have some kind of a, leg up in the longevity department
Yeah.
compared to, say, a solitary tiger?
It really does make you wonder, right? Like all those old sayings about a lone wolf, like are they really destined to live shorter lives because they're not running with a pack?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating question.
So we're going to find out.
Let's dive in.
All right. So this research, it's not just as simple as social versus solitary.
Right.
This paper dives into a whole spectrum of social structures,
Yeah.
and it categorizes over 150 animal species.
Wow.
All right, so picture this like it's a sociality continuum. So Garo Gomez lays it out in 5 categories. We start with solitary creatures, the tigers, the bears, happily doing their own thing.
Right.
Then we move to gregarious animals. Think like zebras, hanging out in these big herds, but not necessarily, deeply bonded.
Yeah, it's like the difference between going to a concert with a group of friends versus joining a book club, right? Like you have that regular interaction and get to know each other. The level of interaction's key here.
Totally. And then we've got the communal folks,
Yes.
like purple martins.
Yes.
They share like a nesting space, but they don't really interact all that much.
Right. They're sharing a wall, but they're not, borrowing sugar from each other or watching each other's kids.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then we've got colonial animals, which are like nesting birds, tons of them. There's like constant chatter, definitely more interaction going on there.
Yes, exactly. It's more like a bustling neighborhood where everyone knows each other's business as opposed to just waving from across the street.
I like that.
Yeah.
And then finally, we reach the social end of the spectrum.
Yes.
The elephants, the primates, and the dolphins of the world.
Exactly.
These animals are living in these like structured societies.
Yes.
Complex hierarchies, often cooperating to raise their young, all that.
Yeah.
So, okay, it's not just about being in a group. It's about, the type of group, the level of interaction, the structure of that society.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning because this study didn't just stop at social structure.
Right.
Zagro Gomez wanted to know how sociality might impact an animal's entire life. Like, how long does it take them to reach maturity?
Uh-huh.
How long does their reproductive window stay open?
Yeah.
He even looked at how their populations respond to, like, big environmental shakeups.
Wow. So, okay, hold on to your hats, folks,
Yeah.
because this study, it didn't stop at just social structure. It dug deep into how sociality might actually affect an animal's whole life.
Right. Yeah.
Analyzing everything from how long it takes to reach maturity to how long their reproductive windows open to how their populations respond to, big environmental changes.
And this is where it gets really intriguing. Remember that massive data set we talked about?
Wow.
Over 150 species across 13 taxonomic classes?
Yep.
Well, the results kind of paint a pretty clear picture. Social species, on average, do tend to live longer than their solitary counterparts.
Wow.
They also tend to have longer generation times and longer reproductive windows. It's like the whole pace of life is different.
So are we saying those social butterflies are just taking their sweet time to, grow up, have babies, and enjoy a longer life?
Well, I did say on average, right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there are always variations and exceptions to the rule. In biology, it's rarely black and white.
Right.
But the trend is definitely there. And here's where things get really interesting. This study actually kind of debunks a long-held assumption about social animals.
Ooh.
What researchers call the social buffer.
Okay, myth busted. I'm all ears.
What's the social buffer?
Yeah.
Well, the idea was that being social offered a kind of like safety net.
Uh-huh.
A buffer against environmental challenges, right? Think about it. A big group might be better at finding food during a shortage or defending themselves against predators, strength in numbers.
Right, that makes sense.
So the assumption was that being social offered, this sort of buffer, a kind of safety net.
Yeah. So did Saguro Gomez, did he find that social groups were more resilient when when they were facing these challenges?
Actually, no.
Oh,
And that's the surprising part. This study found absolutely no link between sociality and long-term population stability. Being part of a group didn't seem to give species any particular advantage when it came to, weathering those environmental storms.
wow, that really throws a wrench in things.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing this discovery has opened up a whole new set of questions for researchers.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we just peeled back a layer of the onion, and now we have a whole new set of questions. Like, what are the factors that contribute to a species' resilience?
Right.
If it's not just social structure, then what else is at play?
Right.
And how does this finding impact our understanding of the interplay between social behavior and evolution?
So many mysteries to unravel.
Yeah.
It seems like this research has done more than just provide answers. It's sparked this whole new wave of questions.
Yes.
But before we dive into those, let's take a closer look at another fascinating aspect of this study.
Okay.
How sociality, or the lack thereof, might actually affect an animal's aging process.
Yeah, and this is where we start to really, question some of our assumptions, right? Like
Mm.
we often think about aging as this sort of universal process, something that affects all living creatures equally.
Right.
But what if social structure actually plays a role in how we age?
Okay, hold on. How do you even measure aging in animals? It's not like they get wrinkles and gray hair, right?
Right, right. Well, there are a couple of ways to look at it. We call it senescence in animals.
Okay.
One way is what's called actuarial senescence, and that basically measures the decline in survival rate as an animal gets older.
Okay.
So are older individuals less likely to survive than younger ones?
Got it.
And then there's reproductive senescence, which focuses on the decline in an animal's ability to produce offspring as they age.
So it's not just about how long they live, it's about how well they're doing in those later years.
Exactly. Now, here's where things get really interesting. This study found that sociality didn't seem to have a significant effect on either of these types of senescence.
Wait, so whether you're solitary creature or part of a big social group, you're going to experience aging in a similar way.
That seems to be the case, at least based on this research.
Right.
And that finding, throws open a whole new can of worms. Like, why wouldn't sociality, which seems to be linked to these longer lifespans, also be linked to slower aging?
Yeah.
It's a puzzle. It's a real puzzle.
Well, we've got lots to unpack here.
Yes, we do.
This is fascinating stuff.
Very cool.
We left off with a real head-scratcher. Social animals, even though they often live longer, don't seem to age any slower than their solitary counterparts.
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it? You'd think all that support, the shared responsibilities, maybe even just having buddies to hang out with,
Right.
would make aging a more gradual process.
Right.
But the data doesn't really seem to support that.
So if it's not about, just lounging around and enjoying the good life with your social group, what's the missing piece here?
Well, and that's where the nuances of social structures really come into play. Remember that sociality continuum we talked about?
Mm-hmm.
Each of those categories, solitary, gregarious, communal, colonial, social, they all have their own unique demands and benefits.
So let's play that out a little bit.
Yeah.
Starting with our solitary creatures, the lone wolf, the independent tigers.
Right.
They have to be completely self-sufficient, finding food, avoiding predators, defending their territory. It's all on them.
Right.
But, on the flip side, they get to keep all the resources for themselves.
Exactly. It's a trade-off. Less support, but also less competition.
Right, yeah.
Now, contrast that with highly social animal, like an elephant or a chimpanzee.
Uh-huh.
They might have a whole network of individuals to help them with those tasks.
Yeah.
But they also have to navigate those complex social hierarchies.
Right.
Potential conflict within the group, competition for resources.
It's like they always say it takes a village. But, villages can also be full of drama.
Exactly.
So could that social stress actually be counteracting the benefits of group living when it comes to aging?
It's a possibility. It really highlights that sociality isn't always, a walk in the park.
Yeah.
There are costs associated with those complex social interactions.
Right.
But here's another angle to consider. What if social animals, especially the ones that cooperate to raise young, what if they actually experience a reduced cost of reproduction?
Okay, I'm listening.
So think about it. If you have help raising offspring, maybe you can afford to reproduce for a longer period of your life
Uh-huh.
without it taking such a toll on your body.
So instead of like burning out quickly, they're pacing themselves,
Exactly.
spreading out that reproductive effort over a longer time.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, wouldn't we still expect to see a difference in their aging rates?
Right.
Like, shouldn't they be aging slower if they're under less stress?
It's a great question, and it really underscores how much we still don't know about the aging process, right?
Right.
It could be that the benefits of sociality, like having helpers and shared responsibilities, are actually helping to offset the potential negative effects of, social stress or reproductive effort.
So it's not that they're like, not aging as quickly, like intrinsically, but they've got this amazing support system
Right, exactly.
helping them stay healthy and active for longer.
It's like running a marathon with a team cheering you on,
Yeah.
handing you water bottles every mile.
Right, exactly.
You might not be running any faster, but you're better equipped to go the distance.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
And that's really the heart of why this research is so important. It's making us re-examine our assumptions about sociality and its impact on the lives of animals. It's not just about living in a group or flying solo. It's about the specific type of social structure.
Right.
The evolutionary pressures that have shaped that structure and how all those pieces fit together to influence the entire life history of a species.
So it's like we've been looking at this puzzle with only half the pieces.
Yeah.
And now this study has given us a whole new set of pieces to work with. Now, I want to circle back to a point you made earlier about social animals being less reactive to those favorable conditions.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain that a little more?
Absolutely. The study uses this concept called reactivity to measure how a population responds to changes in its environment.
Okay.
So imagine a sudden influx of resources, like maybe after a fire clears out an area and creates these new opportunities for growth.
Uh-huh.
A highly reactive species would see a really rapid increase in population size, like a classic boom cycle.
So they're just like taking advantage of the good times.
Yeah. Think of, rodent populations that explode after a good rainy season.
Oh, right, right.
But what Salguero Gomez found is that social animals tend to be less reactive. Their populations don't fluctuate as wildly in response to those changes.
No, that seems counterintuitive at first. You'd think like a big organized group would be in a prime position to exploit those favorable conditions.
You would think.
Right. More individuals to grab those resources.
Right.
More helpers to raise all those extra offspring.
But remember, those complex social structures often come with built-in mechanisms for regulating population growth.
Uh-huh.
Maybe there's increased competition for resources within the group, or maybe there are social cues that limit reproduction when resources are abundant.
So it's like they've got this internal system of checks and balances.
Exactly.
To prevent those unsustainable booms.
Exactly. And that could actually be a major factor in their long-term survival, because those boom and bust cycles, they might seem advantageous in the short term, but they can leave a population really vulnerable to future disturbances.
It's like blowing all your savings when you get a bonus.
Right.
Instead of investing it wisely. So in a way, this lower reactivity could actually be a sign of a more stable, more sustainable population strategy for social animals.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It really highlights the importance of considering the long-term consequences of different life history strategies and how those strategies are shaped by social structure. But, this study didn't just look at how reactive a species was to good times. It also looked at their response to tough times, using a concept called attenuation.
Okay, attenuation. Refresh my memory on what that one means again.
So think of it as a measure of how much a population kind of shrinks in the immediate aftermath of a disturbance.
Okay.
So a species with high attenuation would experience a more significant initial dip in population size after a fire, a drought, or some other challenging event.
So they're taking a harder hit right out of the gate.
Right.
But it's not necessarily a bad thing?
Exactly. Again, it's all about the long game. In some cases, that initial decline could actually be beneficial. It might prevent overexploitation of resources and allow the population to recover more quickly in the long run.
It's like taking a step back to regroup and strategize.
Exactly.
Before charging forward again.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the study found that social animals tend to have higher attenuation than less social species.
Hold on. That's surprising.
It is.
I would have thought that having a big social network would make a species more resistant to those initial shocks.
Yeah, it's a natural assumption.
Yeah,
But we have to remember that social animals, they often have more complex life histories, right?
right.
They might have longer generation times, slower reproductive rates, and those intricate social hierarchies we talked about earlier.
Right.
All of those factors could contribute to a higher attenuation. They're simply not as quick to bounce back from a disturbance as a species with faster, more flexible life history.
So it's like the difference between a small agile startup and a large established corporation.
Perfect analogy.
The startup can pivot and adapt to market changes really quickly, while the corporation might take a little longer to adjust course.
Exactly. It really drives home the point that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to survival in the natural world, right?
Right.
Different life history strategies shaped by social structure and environmental pressures can lead to very different responses to change.
It's like we've been looking at this puzzle with only half the pieces.
Yeah.
Now this study has given us a whole new set of pieces to work with. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have
from the intricacies of social structures to the complexities of aging.
lots of complexity.
So can we try to like distill some of these key takeaways
Sure.
for our listeners? What are the big aha moments that they should walk away with?
Well, I think one of the biggest aha moments is that sociality really does seem to be intertwined with an animal's life history, right? We see this fascinating pattern where social animals, on average, they tend to live longer, they take longer to reach maturity, they have longer reproductive windows.
Right.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a trend that seems to emerge across a very diverse range of species.
So it's like sociality is linked to this like slower, more deliberate pace of life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Like they're playing the long game,
Uh-huh.
investing in those relationships and those social structures that might pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and then there's that surprising finding about the social buffer, right?
Yeah.
The idea that being social automatically makes you more resilient.
Right.
Turns out it's not that straightforward. This study found no direct link between sociality and a species' ability to weather environmental changes.
Right. And in fact, social animals were actually less reactive to favorable conditions. They didn't see those population booms that you might see in a less social species.
Exactly, which suggests that, social animals might have evolved different mechanisms for regulating their population growth.
Right.
Like they have these built-in checks and balances to prevent those unsustainable booms and busts, promoting that long-term stability instead of short-term gains.
And then, of course, there's that really mind-boggling finding about aging.
Yes.
That social animals, while they might live longer, they don't seem to be aging any slower than their solitary counterparts.
It's really a puzzle.
Yeah.
And it opens up this whole new avenue for research, trying to really unravel that complex interplay between social structures, life history strategies, and the aging process.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface of understanding how social behavior, life history, and the aging process are all intertwined. This study has given us so much to think about, so many new avenues to explore.
Absolutely. And I'm particularly excited to see more research on how specific types of social structures, those nuances within the sociality continuum, might be playing a role in shaping these aging patterns.
Yeah.
Like, is a species with a strict hierarchy aging differently than a species with a more egalitarian social structure?
Right.
Are cooperative breeders experiencing different patterns of senescence than species where individuals are primarily competing for resources? These are questions that we're just beginning to grapple with.
Yeah, it highlights the need for this like more nuanced understanding of sociality.
Yes.
It's not just this, simple binary social or not social.
Right.
It's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
And those subtle differences in social structure could have this really profound impact on a species' life history and its ability to thrive in a changing world.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us to a really crucial question for our listeners. Why should we care about all of this? Like, how does this research on animal sociality connect to the real world,
Yeah.
to the challenges that we're facing as humans?
That is a great question. It's tempting to kind of look at this as just, interesting animal trivia.
Right?
But I think there are some really important connections to our own lives here.
I completely agree. I mean, for one thing, as we humans continue to put pressure on natural ecosystems, through habitat loss and climate change and pollution,
Right.
understanding how different species are responding to those pressures is absolutely crucial for conservation efforts.
Yeah.
And this research gives us this whole new lens through which to view those responses. It reminds us that social structure plays this vital role in a species' vulnerability or its resilience.
So we can't just look at an animal's habitat or its diet.
Right.
We need to understand its social structure and how that might influence its ability to cope with change.
Exactly. And this leads to a second connection, which is perhaps even more profound. As humans, we are social animals too.
Yeah.
And while, our societies are vastly different from those of elephants or meerkats,
Right.
there might be some underlying principles that connect us.
Yeah.
Could this research on animal sociality shed light on our own social evolution, our own life history strategies, maybe even our own aging process?
It's a fascinating possibility. It
Yeah,
really makes you wonder, right?
it does.
Like as we become increasingly isolated in our modern world,
Yeah.
are we altering our own lifespans
Right.
and experiences of aging?
Yeah.
Are there lessons we can learn from the social structures of other species that might help us navigate, the challenges of our own social lives?
Those are great questions.
This research leaves us with more questions than answers, but it's a really powerful reminder that we are part of this much larger web of life,
Mm.
a web in which social connections play this really fundamental role.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's been an incredible journey into the complex world of animal sociality, and we've learned that there is still so much to discover about how these social connections shape the very fabric of life.
To our listeners, we hope this has sparked your curiosity and left you with a sense of awe
Mhm.
at the intricate connections that bind us all together, from the smallest solitary creature to the most complex human societies.
Mhm.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, so many fascinating threads to keep pulling on here.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, like, are there things that we can learn from how other animals have organized their societies
Very
that
much.
might be relevant to our own, challenges and opportunities as humans? Yeah, yeah. Like, as we've become more and more isolated in our modern world, are we somehow like messing with our own, lifespans and experiences of aging?
It's a fascinating question, and it's one that researchers are really just beginning to explore.
This whole deep dive has been such a, incredible reminder that we are just like one species among, countless others on this planet,
Right.
and that we're all connected in these really complex and fascinating ways.
And that those connections, they matter.
Yeah.
They matter for our well-being. They matter for the health of the planet.
It's like we've been given this whole new set of lenses to view the natural world through.
Yeah, it's a shift in perspective. It's a new way of understanding our place in the grand scheme of things.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible deep dive into the world of animal sociality.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has left you with a sense of wonder and a renewed appreciation for the power of connection,
Yes.
in all its forms.
Absolutely.
From the tiniest solitary creatures to the most complex human societies.
We're all connected.
We're all connected. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next deep dive into the mysteries of the natural world.